In just a few hours' time, Donald Trump will announce his list of tariffs to be placed on U.S. imports. Meanwhile, it's been over 3 weeks since Ukraine agreed to an unconditional ceasefire, but the war rages on. Are we any closer to reaching an agreement to end the war in Ukraine, or are we further away than ever? Joining us now to discuss these issues is U.S. career diplomat, former U.S. Assistant Secretary of State, and former U.S. Ambassador to Poland, Daniel Fried. Hello, sir, and thank you very much for joining us tonight. We appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
Yes. Now, how do you think that these new tariffs will affect the transatlantic and NATO's unity in the months and years to come? Can the Europeans rely on security guarantees of the ally that uses punitive measures against it?
I would try to separate the economic tensions from the overall security relationship. I understand that Europeans react very badly to both the rhetoric of the administration and the economic hits that the administration is going to impose on Europe and on most of the world. But Trump has stated repeatedly his support for NATO, and his meeting with Mark Rutte, NATO Secretary General, a couple of weeks ago was successful. Coming out of that meeting, Secretary General Rutte was pretty positive. He was hopeful about U.S. commitment to NATO. So I would not conflate these issues. On the other hand, Europe will likely retaliate if the U.S. sanctions are what they appear to be, that is directed against Europe as well as other countries. And that may be best case, hopeful case, start a period of negotiations. Trump loves to seize the initiative, shake things up, and then may try to negotiate from what he considers to be a position of strength. I think that if Europe pushes back, and if U.S. Stock markets suffer, that Trump may be more in a mood to negotiate, especially after last night's by-elections in the United States that suggested a softening of support for Republicans. So this is not the end of the world, but it is certainly unpleasant. I have more problems with U.S. threats against Greenland and the nonsense about Canada becoming the 51st state. But the tariffs, however unpleasant, could be resolved through negotiations, and we could get through this. Maybe.
Maybe, a big maybe. Well, we'll see exactly what comes out here in just a couple hours. I'd like to shift the focus now over to Ukraine, because it seems like we're a bit further apart than we were just a couple weeks ago. Now, 3 weeks after Ukraine agreed to an unconditional ceasefire, Putin appears to be stalling on the implementation, as noted by Estonian Prime Minister Kaja Kallas. Former Prime Minister Kaja Kallas, chief diplomat, EU diplomat. Do you believe that strategic objectives of Vladimir Putin and this apparent delaying tactic, if you will, how should Ukraine and its allies respond?
Well, first of all, you are right that Putin is delaying. And not only that, but he has outmaneuvered the Trump administration, at least so far, by saying yes in principle to Trump's ceasefire proposal and then larding it up with conditions that make it impossible to achieve. And he's got the United States basically playing his game. That is a tactical mistake. The better news is that President Trump may be running out of patience with Vladimir Putin's game playing and stalling tactics. And the White House is finally, again, starting to talk about additional pressure on Russia. This is exactly what they should do. The Ukrainians, meanwhile, need to be the party that says yes to the American proposals and not the party that says no. Let Putin be the one who says no. Let Trump come to the correct conclusion that Putin is the problem, and then maybe Trump will take action to put pressure on Putin so that he becomes more reasonable. But you are certainly correct. The Americans are not playing it smart. There are Americans who understand Russia, who have learned the lessons of, let us say, decades of experience with the Kremlin. But it appears the Trump administration is having to learn those lessons from the beginning, all over again. And that's not good. That is a waste of time, and we're allowing Putin to lead Trump by the nose, and hopefully Trump will get tired of this and push back.
Mr. Ambassador, you have a wealth of experience dealing with the Russians. I'd like to ask you about this reported violation of the ceasefire on energy infrastructure by both sides. The Russians accuse the Ukrainians of violating the ceasefire, and then the Ukrainians also say that Russia continues to attack its energy infrastructure. Does the United States need to put something in place to be able to verify who indeed is violating the ceasefire, any agreements that do and are put in place?
It's not clear to me that there is agreement on any ceasefire whatsoever. The Russians are continuing their attacks against Ukraine. Moreover, the Black Sea negotiations produced an unclear set of inconsistent statements in which the Russians made a lot of preconditions for a Black Sea ceasefire, and the Americans did not seem to push the Russians, for example, to stop attacks against the port of Odessa. So this is not a great situation. I think we can count on the Russians not respecting a ceasefire. I think that they will continue not to do so. I think that their need for this ceasefire against energy infrastructure to be respected, Trump is going to have to push it, and I think that the Russians are going to resist. We are nowhere near a serious ceasefire, and we're not going to get near one until the U.S. puts much more pressure on Russia than appears to be the case at the moment.
And finally, Mr. Ambassador, very briefly, because we're almost out of time, Ukraine has reportedly rejected the minerals deal that President Zelensky claims that would effectively restrict Ukrainian sovereignty and the ability to join the European Union. How do you assess the balance between Ukraine's need for economic support versus its insistence on NATO membership and its economic, demands and support right now?
Well, a good minerals deal would be good for everybody. The deal that was supposed to be signed on February 28th, that was the day that the Trump-Zelensky meeting blew up in the Oval Office. That agreement was actually very good. It was a solid piece of work. The draft agreement that the Americans have sent the Ukrainians, it's been published, is much longer, much more complicated, and appears to be unbalanced. That is, it gives the Americans a lot of power. It doesn't give the Ukrainians as much, and it gives the U.S. and U.S. companies right of first refusal for a lot of projects. The Ukrainians should continue to negotiate. The idea of some kind of U.S.-Ukrainian cooperation on development of its natural resources is a pretty good idea. That is, it gives Donald Trump a stake in Ukraine in his terms. So I wouldn't say no to it if I were the Ukrainians, but I would watch out for things they can't accept. Don't be afraid to negotiate a good deal.
Very well said, Mr. Ambassador. Ambassador Daniel Fried, former U.S. Ambassador to Poland, and thank you very much for joining us on World News Tonight.
Thanks for having me.
And that concludes this edition of World News Tonight. Thank you for joining us. Have a wonderful evening, and we'll see you next time. Good night.